Good morning. This is Greg Ehlers, and I'm here with Alex and Jude. They are two of my cohorts, close friends, and consulting partners in the area of employment. And today we are going to talk about the employment process from the beginning to the end. And obviously, being the first podcast, we're going to start at the beginning. And I think the most important way to start this is to introduce Jude and Alex properly. Alex, it's great to meet you today. How are you doing?
I'm well, Greg. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. And Jude, how are
Excellent.
you doing today?
Fantastic. Loving the weather in good old Sin City, Las Vegas.
I like that. Well, I'm staring out at snow up where I am today, so we've got a little bit of all the climates. So Jude, we're going to talk today about the initial process of applying for a job and employers looking for candidates. And if it would be all right, maybe we could start off with a you on this and something that has been top of mind that's happened in the past, or something that's happened in the past with new employees looking for a job or employers seeking employees and what they have or have not accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that something that I see often that I've educated job seekers on is doing the 5, 10 minutes, maybe even an hour of really digging in and doing the research on the client that they're about to sit in front of. There tends to be this sort of generic approach and kind of relying on their previous experience where they feel like they're really ready, and then when they're sitting right directly in front of you and absorbing the questions that are presented, they're extremely unique for different employers. So just really taking the time to research, I would say, is my first suggestion on that. And there's a lot of other things we can get into the weeds on, but that would be the first one. And that is because it's going to adjust your approach. You're going to start visualizing yourself in the role. You're going to visualize yourself in front of that client. And when you're doing that and you have that background information, you're going to automatically start adjusting the way that you're approaching, the way that you're thinking, the way that you're presenting yourself, and maybe even the adjustment on your resume too, throwing out some of the skills that may be redundant or irrelevant for that client, knowing that they're not going to be looking for those, and adjusting it with the skills that you know that you have that are also being extracted directly from what you're researching.
That makes sense. So, Alex, when you hear that, and Alex, you are one of the top recruiters in the New England area and probably have written more resumes than I know that I ever have. When you think about what you just said in terms of researching the client and adjusting the approach of the resume, maybe
Mhm.
maybe you can expand on that a bit because you are working directly with the clients that are potentially interviewing with, Jude's clients per se. So maybe spend a few minutes on how you adjust the resume or how you help or push the person towards that research on the client and what you're giving them.
Sure thing. And one of the things, some of the feedback that we receive from clients a lot during the interview process is that um, the candidates sometimes have a tendency to focus just on their experience. And while that experience is great, you also want to recognize and address how your experience is going to address the needs of the client that you're interviewing with. How are you going to be able to contribute to their company and their culture? And how are you going to help the company get to the level that they are, what are the company's goals and how are you going to help them get there? A lot of what we can see on resumes can be very generic information. And one of the things that employers are looking for is they want specifics. If you say that one of your skills is conflict resolution, well, then we're going to expect that you can actually provide us some examples. How do you address conflicts? What is your management style? How do you respond to an adverse situation? Especially in the hospitality industry, which is what my company deals with a lot. that can be, you're dealing with customers and people all day long, and people come in all shapes, sizes, personalities, cultures, etc. And you really want to make sure that what you're telling about yourself on your resume, you need to be able to support it during an interview. Not only should you be more specific on your resume, but especially in the interview process, you need to be prepared to actually discuss those things. You can't just assume that if you check it off on, on a box on a resume, that somebody's just going to trust that, oh, this person checked
Yeah.
off and said they're great at conflict resolution. That's it, that I must assume that they are. No, you need to actually give us data and some evidence that to support what you're saying that are your skill sets.
Jude, do you think that, thanks, Alex. Jude, do you think that expanding in a cover letter on some of these is good, or do cover letters actually have the same weight that they did when my hair was brown?
Greg, I'm so glad you're bringing this up
Yeah.
because I have been conflicted with the age-old cover letter. Now, I'll still submit a cover letter because a lot of employers appreciate it. But I will tell you, as a job seeker, I'm here to make a confession. Forgive me, it's been a week since my last confession, but when someone gives me a cover letter, I appreciate that they went through all the trouble, but unless I'm running it through some other software, like I really just kind of skim it.
Mhm.
I'm really just focusing on the resume and the way that I relate the cover letter to changes that are happening now with the resume is the objective. You know how we used to always focus on what's that objective? It's
Yep.
like I'm looking for, well, everybody knows you're looking for a job. Okay. So the objective looks so much different. Now it's just a summary of skills. I kind of look at that with a cover letter. If someone doesn't give me a cover letter, I'm not going to be offended. I'm really just looking to capture those immediate skill sets on the resume. And then let me see if it matches up when they're sitting in front of me. That's it.
Got it.
But I'm curious what y'all think about the cover letter.
I actually would love to chime in on this as well. Jude, you bring up a lot of great points. The cover letter doesn't have quite the same weight that it used to carry before. And what we see, there's a variety of different kinds of cover letters I've seen come through. Some people will send a 12-page cover letter.
Yeah.
Saying everything that that they're good at, but then the experience is only, say, a paragraph long, and it doesn't quite match up.
Yeah.
And again, to what we were saying before, previously, about having there be evidence to support. So if in your cover letter, you're telling us that you're capable of conflict resolution and you have a great management style, but then are you giving us the data in your work experience part of the resume that is supporting what the cover letter says? Or is the cover letter just a bunch of BS? And if it's just a bunch of BS, then just don't include it. Just don't include it then.
Yeah.
A lot of clients, and the feedback we've heard from clients, is that they don't even read the cover letter anymore. But Jude, back to what you said about the objective, I'm from that same era as well, where the objective was short and sweet of what you were looking to accomplish. But that people seem to have gotten away from that a little bit. So cover letters, I'm with you, Jude, are a little bit on the fence, depending on, I have seen some great cover letters though, where actually the information in the cover letters I thought should be in the resume portion. So I think that's something interesting that you want to make sure as well, because I have found a few higher up level candidates who will include some really valid information in their cover letter, but it should have been included in the juice, in the nuts and bolts of what their experience is.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that's not going to get lost in the cover letter for sure.
Yeah.
Those are great points. Staying on this topic, because I know I've experienced it working with some of Alex and my associates. There's certain jobs or companies that seem to discredit a candidate before they've even shown up. And these jobs that they've taken may have had something to do with COVID. And so their tenure may be shorter than what a employer's looking for. So Jude, when you're looking for somebody, and COVID now is, going on 4 years or 3 years past, but it still disrupted the workforce a bit. How do you work with a client that says, well, I'm not going to take Bob or Steve or Lucy if they work for this company or they haven't had a tenure for long enough time, but yet the reason their resume reads as it does is they needed to support their family during COVID, and everything that they traditionally did was furloughed or closed, but they
Yeah.
still needed to feed their families. So is that something that you think is incumbent upon somebody like Alex when she's talking to you about a candidate to express? But at the same time, you're looking through a lot of different resumes. How would you want to be able to be made aware of that in a way that you actually give a little bit of weight to the client or the potential candidate versus just saying they're no longer qualified because they work for this type of company or this style of business?
Yeah. What a
Is
fantastic, yeah, that is a
Great
really
question.
fantastic subject because that is a sore spot for a lot of job seekers. And from the
Mhm.
clients that I consult with, they're quick to automatically disregard any of the applicants that come in that have a gap.
Mhm.
And I very, very strongly advise against that. And when I give them a few points of logic, then they're very willing to accept it and at least sit in front of the individual that does have a gap in the resume. But I'll share this with a story. So I had a client that wanted a very specific type of person for a position. Now, when I say a specific type of person, they were really looking for someone that fit within their culture. And, I always say that you have to be very careful in that way because you're limiting your pool and you're also limiting your thinking and doing so because you never know what you're going to get. But on paper, a resume that I put in front of them, on paper, it looked great. But even though they had all of these skills, they automatically said, you know what, it looks like she has 2 years here or she was out of work. I just, we don't want to have to deal with that in our workforce, and a lot of conversations that happened there. And I convinced them why it was necessary to consider that. Like, you have no idea what happened in that time.
Right.
You may not even know that they have their own business on the side, that they're developing skills in a different way. We don't know, right? We can only speculate. So I brought them in, I did the phone screening, and they had passed that portion of it. I really felt though as though it was still capturing what was on paper, et cetera. So I got them in front of the client. And then the first question they asked was, we noticed there was a gap in your employment. Why don't you share some of that with us? And we were all in tears at the end of this interview. This poor woman, yes, she was working on the side doing she was moonlighting for someone else and keeping her skill set up. But the reason that she had that gap was that her husband was on hospice. He was dying.
Ooh.
And she couldn't re-enter the workforce until he had passed.
Right.
And this was a 2-year saga that was occurring. And she was incredibly poised, incredibly professional, never broke character. And here we are just thinking like, there's an example. And she was still at the same time, this may not be the situation for everyone, but still at the same time, able to demonstrate how she was keeping her skill set alive during that time. So it was like, that's an example of not discrediting when you do see that space, especially what we know in the last few years, right? Coming from COVID. Yeah. I strongly recommend not even ask that question in the interview and don't even discredit it on paper. That's my opinion. I don't know. Tell me what you think.
I didn't know if you were going to respond, Greg, but I'm just going to jump in if that's okay. I couldn't agree more, Jude. And honestly, to what I've also seen that I really, really love is for some stay-at-home moms who are now including that on their resume. If they had a 3-year gap, and they'll now write on their home manager, was raising 2 kids, both under the age of 2. I mean, there are skill sets around that. There's skills that you are developing.
Domestic engineer. I've had a mother say she was a domestic engineer.
Domestic engineer. And I mean, even to your example with the candidate whose husband was on hospice, I mean, that experience alone probably expanded, her skill set. And, it might have given her new perspective on her own personal management style. She might have some certain flexibility or some certain focuses that weren't quite there before. And how this all kind of ties in from what the employer is seeing. I think employers need to be sometimes, not everybody, but some need to be a little bit more flexible, because there have been so many studies that show that emotional intelligence weighs a very serious factor in the development and profitability of a company. And, having examples on a resume or with certain candidates, you don't know what their life experiences have been. I know I've been through a multitude of life experiences, and somehow I've turned some of those into the things that are helpful skills for me in my own career path.
Yeah.
And I think just being open-minded and having the ability to have those kinds of conversations only will really help a business on a more long-term basis with how you're looking at the kind of people that you're hiring. Skill set is important, of course, but also, what kind of person is it? Is it somebody that is always willing to better themselves and wanting to grow? So if they might be missing skill sets, is it something that's teachable to them? Because, especially with COVID, I think there's a lot of people out there who either took a step back. I've had candidates not be considered for an interview because they were an assistant general manager, but then during the pandemic, they were suddenly a shift leader. But to what you said earlier, Greg, they had to feed their families. And you know what? That just goes to show that they're willing to do anything to take care of the people that they love. Take care of themselves. And, if they need to take a step back, it means that they probably don't have a big ego, so yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And I like that. The question I have for both of you is, how do we do a better job of coaching our clients? Because at the end of the day, our clients are the ones that have the issues with retention, or have the idea that, well, Lisa or Steve have to fit this suit, or I'm just not going to interview them. And to be able to get that person's trust, or get them to move out the risk curve a little bit to take that interview. Because that's where it's just easier, where they say, no, Jude, I've tried this before and it just didn't work. And every time I did, it was a waste of my time, or we hired somebody and 3 months later, they're out the door. So are there certain ways we can help in a persuasive way or a trusting way to help the clients look through the lens that we've just spent a few minutes talking about?
Yes, I'm very passionate about this. So, first of all, I don't know if that has to do with just simply having experience or by nature. I don't know, but I find myself to be somewhat intuitive, and that comes with being a recruiter and having experience, right? When you're sitting in front of 100 million people, you're bound to start developing some intuition. So I vehemently defend myself when I have a good feeling about a candidate. And if I'm not right, hey, I'm not right, but we tried, right? So when I'm convincing my client, the first thing I do is, when they're rejecting an application, is I say, I'll give you an example. So it looks like you've been telling me repeatedly that you're really searching for somebody that has adaptability and self-awareness. You've learned by previous applicants and previous coworkers that this didn't work for you, and that's what was lacking. Is that correct? So regardless of skill set, if that's that important to you, I can guarantee you that's what this individual has. What is it going to hurt to have 5 minutes, just have a 5-minute discussion with them and potentially find your right person? So just using those adjectives that they're feeding back to you, telling you what they want on their workforce. and finding that in those conversations that the client is not having, you're having with them when you're bonding with them for those first 5 minutes on that phone screen, things like that.
Makes sense. What do you have to say on that, Alex?
No, I actually love that you brought up self-awareness and adaptability, because I think self-awareness is absolutely one of the utmost important qualities that somebody can have. And I think that a lot of people don't practice it enough. It's not there. Self-awareness isn't there to criticize yourself, but it is there to be, to be a sounding board to yourself and say, where am I lacking? Okay, why do I see that over the past 3 jobs that I've had, I continue to have this issue? At some point, you have to realize it's not the world working against you, but it could very well be how you are processing these situations and what your own response is. And is there a way to change what your response is that would only work better for you as far as, enhancing your position at the company or being a better manager? I think self-awareness is something that absolutely every single person on the planet should practice, whether it be for personal or professional reasons. And then, Greg, to touch on what your initial question was in regards to how do we have these conversations with clients and employers, I think the way I the way I view recruiting is, that there should be an actual partnership. A recruiter or a talent acquisition specialist shouldn't be there just to put butts in beds, to quote my hotel verbiage from back when my hotel we're not there to just put bodies in there. We should be there as an actual partner to you. So that way, to what Jude said, your intuition, like we have a lot of intuition. If I understand Jude's business, then my intuition about, more than just what's on the resume, but any red flags that are coming up from as far as body behavior, eye contact, very basic things, how somebody carries themselves. Do they speak with confidence? Are they jumbling over their words when I ask them a question, which kind of leads me to believe that you're not being entirely honest, or you didn't have these specific examples that match the criteria on your resume. A staffing partner and recruiter should be a partner. It should be somebody that can also help a employer rely on emotional intelligence. If your recruiter is the first barrier between the candidate and the employer, then we need to have some of that intuition and utilize it to pay attention to more than just what's on the resume. Because the personality has to also contribute to the culture of the company. And if the company doesn't have their culture established, let us help you establish the culture that's going to keep the employees there on a long-term basis and help you with retention. I mean, a recruiter should be a true valuable partner where we can have transparent, sometimes uncomfortable conversations. I know that there are certain clients out there where we will provide them great candidates, but if the candidates aren't staying longer than 90 days, well, then let's break that down. How come? What is happening in the company that people aren't staying there for longer than 90 days? What's the issue with the retention? And of course, those conversations can be difficult and challenging, but it still needs to happen to see how we can all improve together to help you get to your financial goals on a long-term basis.
And that's where I wanted to go, because on touching on this in a real life situation, I'm finding myself as much of a business coach for an owner of 25 franchises as much as I am trying to find somebody for him, because they have a tree of trust. And in most industries, especially where there's a lot of turnover in light manufacturing, hospitality, all of these areas, and it's continuing to seep up even further as people want work-life balance. There's a lack of ability for owners or people that are in power making the decisions. They've really never talked to anyone. And they don't have anybody to talk to. And I know, Jude, when we worked together and you were you ran HR, it was a back and forth conversation about how we felt about people, or we felt about the environment. Because if the self-actualization isn't just about the candidate, it's also about the place of employment. It's about
Mhm.
the leadership. And I I guess where I'm going with this is, how, give me an example, Jude, of where you're actually able to take, I mean, how many steps does it take to really to get to that person of authority to be able to have a trusting conversation to say, look, I've brought you 10 candidates and these were A candidates
Mhm.
everywhere else. 6 of them have gotten jobs, and the places they've gone, they're doing great. What's going on here? And tell
Mhm.
me the situation about your company. Is it you? Who is the person that's creating this environment that my candidates are just saying, I'm not interested, and you weren't interested? Is it because you adhere to a policy of never trying to hire people that can take your job? What's your ethos? Because I think that's the next evolution in this hiring process of, um, after action report, if you will. I brought you 6 A candidates. They've all got
Mhm.
jobs, and every one of them didn't want to work for you, or they weren't hired by you. You didn't like something about them. How do you have that conversation? I know it can't happen right away. You're sure not going to call somebody up and say, what the hell's up with your company? But
Mhm.
walk me through that a little bit, because I think that skill is something that you have uh,
Yeah.
done a lot with.
Yeah. I've definitely dealt a lot with that. And in the past, I used to broach the subject with high sensitivity and kind of allowed the client to lead and steer the conversation. But now I take a very inquiry based approach and I'm very assertive with it. So the first step is always taking that inquiry where I want to know, why are they being rejected? Like, give me something substantial, not just that you didn't feel great about them or that they had a big nose and you didn't appreciate the blouse they were wearing that day. We'll talk about how to dress in an interview later. But anyway, um, so so I I get a few. I'll talk with them and I'll say, okay, what was on this applicant? Tell me why you rejected them. How about this one? How about this one? I want to see a pattern. If it's all over the place, that's where I'm going to terminate the conversation. I'm going to say, listen, let's get real here. Like, you're asking me to fill this position, but you're rejecting every single person. I need you to take responsibility. And I'll be pretty assertive with them. And most of the time they'll accept it. And if they don't, then they come back a few days later and say, yeah, you're right. But um, I need them to take responsibility. And that's another thing too, even with hiring managers, with recruiters, or with leadership. When it's been 6 months, this vacancy is still open and all these candidates are being rejected, then it's time for me to have a tough conversation with them. And that is where they consistently are putting the onus on the applicant, when in fact, there's a lot of skills that the hiring managers, leadership, and recruiters are lacking as well, and which is those consistent follow-up questions. If you ask a question to somebody and it wasn't quite the answer, was it, are you going to stop there? Like, inquire a little bit more, ask a deeper question, take responsibility for the engagement in that conversation versus just terminating it and automatically assuming that they're not the right fit because they didn't give you the right answer. You have to dig deeper. So, and just being assertive, letting them know, listen, you've got to come back with something more tangible than just that it didn't work for you, you know?
Do you find that and the reason I ask this question is because you and I both experienced it together, but more importantly, um, just beyond that, in the last number of years, the people that are doing the interviewing internally in the company, we don't have any control over that. But yet at the same time, they don't, in many cases, know either why they're interviewing them, or they don't want to interview them, and or they feel threatened by that person that they're interviewing.
Interesting. That is so interesting you say that. Yeah, that's true.
So where I'm going with this is, when I have a candidate that's going in for, I have somebody that's going in for a multi-state manager job, and
Yeah.
I know for a fact that the owner has a person that's in that position, but he wants to remove them because they don't have the skills. or the business is growing too big, or whatever their styles are, he'd like to replace them. Well, I can't have a conversation because I know enough with that person that I know will be doing some of the interviewing, but I can ask, or I can coach my candidates in a
Mhm.
different way. And
Yeah.
and I guess what I'm saying is, is there an ethical line there that I'm crossing? Is because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help the absolute and final client, right?
Mhm.
And I'm trying to give the applicants the ability to matriculate around a difficult situation that
Yeah.
that they are aware of. But where is there an ethical issue there, Jude, that I'm crossing? How do I do that? Because in the end, I want that company to continue to grow, but I
Yeah.
don't want the owner of the company to go, why do you keep giving me all these guys and they just don't keep coming through? Like you
Yeah.
said, because then all of a sudden I'm getting into an internal HR conversation, which I'm not trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you
Exactly.
know where I'm going with that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Exactly. So that is kind of a tricky conversation because that's where the educational piece comes into play. A lot of times your leadership, they're not in HR because they don't like HR. Like they don't want to deal with it. It's not like they don't like the HR person, but they don't want to deal with HR. And that's where I get to give them some pieces of education. So whether that has to do with compliance, whether that has to do with regulation and certain questions you can or cannot ask in an interview, anything that's protected under EEOC, things like that, or whether it's just best practice. So I've found that I would say 100% of the time they're very grateful for the educational piece of it. And I'm happy to deliver that to them. With like, something that I would do want to make you aware of is, under EEOC guidance, it's best to present this question in, and I'll give them a different example. So yeah, I would say delivering some educational pieces of it without assuming that they're ignorant on the matter is probably the best way to approach it.
That makes sense. Alex, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that you phrase it as educational, right, Jude? Because that's really what should be there in a partnership. We should be, your hiring folks, your recruiters, should be there to not only keep a pulse, I guess keep a pulse check
Yeah.
on what's happening in the candidate pool, because how you may have been hiring 10 years ago might need to be adjusted with
Yeah.
how things are now. As we all know, the cost of living in this country is sky high. There's a lot of job hopping around right now because people are trying to pay their bills.
Mhm.
And, so people are probably more chasing the company than they are brand and company loyalty like they used to, And in addition to that, you add on the extra layer of that we have all these different generations in the workforce right now, and everybody's trying to figure out how to work cohesively together.
Mhm.
And so I think everybody being open-minded and educating one another, and everybody just being open-minded in general is really necessary in this day and age, because the younger generation, they have certain skills that some folks in the older generations might need to capitalize on, but at the same time some of the younger generation has some things that they absolutely need to learn from the older generation. There's things for
Agree.
everybody to learn from one another. And when it comes to working with your clients and going through some of these challenges, it needs to be a two-way conversation. It should not just be, and this
Mhm.
also comes back to the employer maybe being more particular about who you choose as your staffing partner, or who you choose to be representing your brand when they're looking for qualified candidates. Because if Jude is going through 15 candidates that seem really qualified to her, but the employer continues to say, no, 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 then a
Mhm.
conversation needs to happen to figure out where is the discrepancy, where is the communication breakdown, what is it that Jude is seeing in these candidates that the employer is not seeing or doesn't find value to. And something else, Jude, that you had said that I wrote down, which was really interesting, was feedback. Feedback, I have found that so many employers are now giving very generic feedback if they're turning a candidate down, or no
Yeah.
feedback at all. And I think staffing agencies need to do a better job about pushing for that feedback and real feedback. I recently had a candidate who went through 6 interviews for a position. We thought for sure he was going to get it, but after the 6th and final interview, they said thank you, but no thank you. And we never received an ounce of valuable feedback.
No,
It said it
yeah.
wasn't the right fit, but this is 2 months of this gentleman's life of interviews that he was preparing for and working towards. And if
No way.
anything, you know, respectfully, I think we should have received actual genuine feedback. He wanted to know the feedback for his future interviews. I would like to know the feedback for future potential candidates I'm going to send your direction. Is there something I should learn better about the company that makes more sense for what their needs are?
Yeah.
So I think providing genuine, authentic, honest feedback is something that companies really need to circle back to and give more value to. If we're sending them candidates, you know, a lot of what I hear from certain account managers is that, oh, well, the candidates don't want to hear the feedback anyway. Well, then that's not the right kind of candidate we should be sending
Yeah.
to begin with, because we want to send candidates who want the feedback.
Yeah.
So I think, I just thank you for bringing up that feedback aspect of it, Jude, because I think that is something that so many companies have gotten away from. You know, it's almost like if they see that the candidate isn't the right fit, they're like, oh, it's out of my hands now, it's off my plate, and they just don't bother. But that is resources and valuable resources that us on the hiring aspect should really know. And it would be great for other candidates to have this information as well, because there are a lot of candidates out there who do take that feedback very seriously and they take it to heart.
Yeah, they do.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that you're really touching on here, and it's a pet peeve of mine, post-COVID, and I don't like to use that as a crutch because it really started even before COVID, but tell me how often you actually see clients in person, and do you feel that if you were able to spend more time in a in-person meeting, that some of these issues that we're talking about, especially on the client side, forget the candidate side, because we're never going to be able to meet the candidates like we could, but you're working with specific candidates. And I know, Jude, you've probably got more clients than you want to share, but the point being is, if you spent more time with 10 of them, i.e. you had a rolling in-person meeting, do you think you would ameliorate some of these issues that we've talked about, whether it's feedback or not truly understanding what they want, or learning the people internally in the company that are going to be doing some of the interviewing, where either you can help coach them or
Yeah.
you can get people to go to the person that is in charge to say, you know, I just met with Steve, and I really don't think he's the best person to be one of the interviewees for a candidate for this job, and here's why. I'd be happy to work with them, but I don't think at this time. But the only reason that you have the validity to do that is because you've met them in person. I mean, talk about, I mean,
Yeah.
I know, like, again, this kind of goes to when I had brown hair, I always felt that I had much higher conversion rates with clients, and the clients had better success when we got to see each other in person. Now we know each other, so whether it's our use of our hands or the way we talk or when we wait, we know more about each other, but we don't know that about a lot of our clients because
Yeah.
we haven't spent as much time together. So do you think, and everybody says, well, time's money and I don't want to waste it, but at the end of the day, doesn't the pie actually grow, or can the pie actually grow if you're spending more time with a client
Yeah.
in person?
Yeah. I talk to them about time is time spent wisely. And it's like, do you want me to just keep providing you with candidates and wasting your time, or can we take a different approach and sort of pivot here? But I think that's where some aspect of the intimacy of the relationship could be improved upon. And let me explain what that means. That's where you may have to visit them on site. If there's not a logistics issue, can you go walk through the office or the plant or whomever your client is? it's amazing how much you're absorbing just by
Mhm.
doing one tour and shaking a couple of hands and watching their body language when certain people walk around, and even having a quick sidebar conversation. Hey, what do you love about working here? You know, things like that. People just, they love to share and vent and express and everything else when they get an opportunity to, right? So there's that part of it. And also coming away from the technical conversation and just talking about who their favorite sports team is or whatever it is. But I think there needs to be a little bit more of that connection piece in the conversation to really break it down. I've found that that's just as valuable, where some people might find it to be a waste of time. I find it to be incredibly valuable in those conversations.
Totally
That's
agree.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I understand, logistics can play a factor in it, of course, but there's also ways, I'm in Boston, but say my client is in Seattle.
Yeah.
If they can't get to Boston or I can't get to Seattle for whatever reason, we can still do a lunch over Zoom. Because I agree with you, Jude, there needs to be, I think it's very important to have a personal relationship with your client as well. Let's get to
Mm-hmm.
know each other as people. Because the more I get to know about you as a person, it's going to help me understand your decision-making process with your
Mm-hmm.
business. It's going to help me better understand the kind of candidates you're looking for that will complement not only your personality, but your brand and what your business goals are. There's all these different aspects of it. My clients, I want to know about their kids. Do they love animals? Because I love animals. I want them to know about me as well. The more we get to know about each other, even on a personal level, is just only improving and enhancing the relationship as a whole. And the more that we can trust each other, the more of a partnership it is. And that even means that the more those challenging conversations don't have to be difficult conversations. They can be
Yeah.
completely transparent, where, I might come back to my client and say, look, I have sent you 10 candidates this over the past year. All 10 candidates left after 3.5 months. What is going on? What do we need to work on to improve your culture? And that's the conversation anybody really wants to have. But at the same time, the world is forever changing. Our companies need to forever change and adjust and adapt as well. To Jude's point earlier about adaptability. Adaptability is of crucial importance to both the candidate and the employer as well. Everybody needs to be willing and flexible to change with the times, because time is not stopping. Things are only going to keep changing. That's the one constant that we can rely on, is that change is forever going to be there. And having that established relationship where you can really be transparent with each other is, I think, more crucial now than it was before, especially with there being, big challenges with company and brand loyalty. Gone are the days where an employee works for you for 40 years. And now I believe I read a study a couple of years ago where by the time somebody is 40, they've changed companies 11 times.
Mm-hmm.
From the baby boomer generation, that's almost unheard of. So, there's a lot of change and growth and adjustment that is forever going to be happening. And I think having that personal relationship with your clients, however you need to establish that. I'm a huge fan of in-person meetings, like to your point, Greg. I think just by walking into their headquarters and seeing, reading how the employees, what's the vibe on the floor? If everyone looks like they're fearful for their next day of employment, or are people actually smiling and enjoying themselves? What kind of vibes are the staff giving out? Do people look happy there? Do people look like they're fake happy while you're there? Having just that much more of an enhanced relationship by bringing in the personability to it, I think is of crucial importance to making it a real partnership. I just am
Agreed.
passionate about that topic, so I'm sorry I went off a little bit.
That's okay. That's all right. So I think if we try and close this up today, in our inaugural podcast, I think, is there a message that well, I guess the message that I'm hearing is there are big changes that can take place, and there's small changes that can make the big changes less fearful, less daunting. And if those small changes can happen And if you're talking to people that are applying for a job, Jude, or the employers that are taking on, it's Monday, tomorrow's Monday, and they need to fill a role, what advice would you give both parties that can get them off to a good start to their week?
Yeah, just being completely open-minded and receptive to any feedback. And I guess the new trendy word is called feed forward, because we're really here to support and educate each other and help each other along the way, regardless of whether we're receiving any type of benefit from it. So just being really willing to just be involved a lot throughout the entire process, and asking for feedback, being receptive to pivoting when you do receive it. I mean, there's so many different types of perspectives, and it's so nutritious to be able to get to receive so much of that feedback. So I would say that. And also to all the applicants, it's okay to ask how you can improve in an interview, and being willing to accept that feedback from someone who is a little more privy to the inside of the entire process. And then also to hiring managers and to recruiters, I would say, take a couple of minutes at the end of your interview and give them some feedback. They don't know, and it's super educational. And I love doing that with my people. I'll say, hey, listen, so now that the interview is over with, I want to share something with you. I know that you didn't mean to present it this way at all. I totally get it. This is a really nerve-wracking time. But one point I want to give you is this, or just one tiny tweak on this, and I know that you're going to nail it next time. How's that? Just give a couple of minutes. Let's help each other out there.
That's great. I especially that last point, Jude. I feel that our obligation is to be a coach, because at the end of the day, if we can do a better job of providing applicants in their skills, then eventually it raises the whole bar and the expectations. And if we're doing the best at providing the candidates and the expectations of the clients are being met, then we're setting a standard that, as we've talked over the last 30 or 40 minutes here, has atrophied or needs work. And we're doing that. And the way we do that is by spending the extra few minutes either with the candidate or with the client, or both, to say, your interview questions in this case here, you opened that client up to something and you dropped it. And if you would have stayed with that, I think you would have learned a lot more about this client, and they would be going on to the second round. But because you didn't give yourself the opportunity to learn about them. Does that make sense? And so I think that's something, Alex, and I kind of jumped in there in the middle, but what message would you leave with candidates and employers and people in the recruiting industry? Because at the end of the day, that all of them, we all need work.
No, I totally agree. And actually, I'm just going to piggyback because Jude once again touched on something else that I feel very strongly about. Nerves are high during an interview. People can have very frayed nerves. They can be, so they might not speak as clearly as what they intended to say. And so I know that's something that I always used to say during interviews, or at the conclusion of an interview. I would say, is there anything that I mentioned during this interview that either rubbed you the wrong way, or that I should explain a little bit better? Because I think it just shows that I'm here right now and I'm open to your feedback. And it will also it should also, an employer or a hiring manager should, I think, take advantage of those opportunities to give the feedback in the moment, like Jude just said. And, if it comes to a point where, the candidate says, hi, is there anything that I said that makes you uncomfortable or that maybe rubs you the wrong way during this interview? And if the hiring manager actually speaks up and said, actually, you know what, when I asked you this question, your response did catch me a little off guard. at least it could give the candidate an opportunity to further clarify, because who knows, they might have just been nervous. Or it might have been a question that they just didn't expect and they hadn't really thought about ahead of time. But at the same time, if it still isn't a good fit, at least it's valuable advice for the candidate moving forward. It also then provides, I guess, valuable advice for the hiring manager. Maybe they should phrase something a little bit differently, or, maybe there's now a different kind of quality we need to look for in potential candidates. I think self-awareness works both ways. It works for the company and it works for the candidate as well. And I think there's just room for improvement on both ends of the spectrum, because it's a tough market out there. Candidates aren't as loyal as they used to, but I think companies also need to make a little bit of effort on their end as well, to see that we're providing an environment that makes sense for people. Work-life balance is now something that's more important than it was before. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. As somebody who is a true workaholic, I think that having work-life balance this day and age is critical. And we need to kind of take all these things into consideration, because the candidates honestly should be interviewing the employer as much as the employer is interviewing the candidate as well. So I think there should be transparent feedback on both sides.
That's perfect. Well, listen,
100%.
I really appreciate both of you being part of our podcast today. Doesn't have a name. I guess that'll evolve with our work, but it's been enlightening, and I think it will be something a lot of people will enjoy hearing about. So with that, I'm going to sign off and wish you both a happy Sunday.
Same to you. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Bye.